I was standing barefoot on my own lawn holding a bag of groceries, staring at a stranger who just walked out of my guest house in nothing but a towel, sipping my orange juice and telling me I had no right to be on his rental property. For a full 10 seconds, I genuinely believed I was being pranked by a hidden camera crew. Then he slammed the door in my face. 2 hours earlier, I had pulled into my driveway after 2 weeks away helping my brother recover from hip surgery. The main house looked fine, mail collected, lawn trimmed thanks to my scheduled service, but something felt off. My guest house, a small but well-kept unit tucked behind the hedges, had a new welcome mat that said Live Laugh Lounge and hanging string lights I'd never seen before. That's when I noticed the keypad lock on the front door had been replaced with a deadbolt. My key didn't fit. I rang the bell, knocked twice, and stepped back. The man inside opened the door wearing my guest towels and looked annoyed that I had interrupted his morning. He said his name was Trevor and he was renting the place directly through Karen from the HOA. He even waved a laminated lease in my face like that made it more official. When I asked if Karen had shown him ownership documents or anything proving she had the right to rent it out, he shrugged and said, "She's the vice president. I assume she runs stuff. I don't know." What annoyed me more, his confidence or the fact that he was using my mug for his tea? I stormed over to the HOA office, which sat smugly next to the clubhouse, like it ruled over our whole cul-de-sac kingdom. Karen was there, of course, sitting behind her desk like a small-town dictator, wearing oversized pearls and a floral blouse that screamed control freak with a flair for pastels. She smiled as I walked in, the kind of smile a person wears when they know you're about to explode and they plan to gaslight you for sport. "Alex, welcome back," she said sweetly. "I heard you were in Arizona with your brother. How's his hip doing?" I didn't bother with small talk. I demanded to know why there was a stranger living in my guest house, why the locks had been changed, and why this man thought Karen had the authority to rent it out. "Oh, dear," she said, feigning surprise. "I thought you'd filled out the voluntary use waiver. We discussed it last month, remember? About unoccupied spaces being made available for temporary community housing. It's all in the bylaws. There was no such discussion. There was no such waiver. But she opened a file drawer, pulled out a document, and showed me a printed form with my forged signature. It looked official, HOA letterhead, dated just 2 weeks ago while I was away. My name was printed neatly. My signature at the bottom looked nothing like mine, and yet it sat there like a legal brick. "You see," she continued, flipping to the second page, "you relinquished temporary rights for the guest unit. It was deemed underutilized. Trevor is family, and we needed to prioritize housing. It's all within policy. Family. So now Karen's nephew was squatting in my backyard with my linens, my groceries, my Wi-Fi, and she was acting like I should be proud of my charitable contribution. I asked her what would happen if I called the police. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Feel free," she said, leaning forward with that same smug grin. "But remember, any action that creates disharmony in the neighborhood is subject to board review." And since you did sign the waiver, she left that sentence hanging like a noose. I left her office with fire boiling in my chest. I called my lawyer on the spot. His name is Miguel, an old college buddy who'd helped me close on the house. When I explained the situation, he was speechless for a moment, then asked me to scan and send the document she showed me. He confirmed immediately. The signature was a joke. It didn't match anything I'd ever signed in my property paperwork. Meanwhile, I tried cutting power to the guest house. The breaker box behind the garage had been padlocked shut. Another shiny new lock. I walked around to the water line. Same story. She'd locked me out of my own utilities. I nearly threw my wrench into the fence. Later that evening, I peeked through the blinds and watched Trevor drag in a second-hand sofa from the back of a pickup truck. Karen was standing nearby, giving him directions, pointing toward the flower beds and telling him where to avoid stepping because the homeowner gets fussy about those. I stood in the shadows of my own kitchen, holding a coffee mug he no longer trusted, and thought, this isn't just petty power tripping anymore. This is a full-on turf war. I looked up community housing ordinances and found nothing that allowed an HOA to seize private property, especially not under fake documentation. Miguel was already drafting a cease and desist letter, but I wanted more than that. I wanted payback that would hit Karen where it hurt, in her ego, her reputation, and her fake pearls. That night, I walked around the block under cover of darkness, jotting down notes on how many other houses had guest units. I knocked on 3 doors and asked innocent questions about HOA rules. 2 of the residents had no idea about any temporary housing initiative. One even told me Karen had warned them never to rent out their guest space without board permission or face a fine. Funny how the rules always seemed to shift when Karen's family was involved. By midnight, I had a folder of evidence started, 2 angry neighbors ready to talk, and a camera installed pointing at the guest house, just in case Trevor decided to try anything else stupid, like hot tub parties or filming TikToks in my bathrobe. This was no longer just a property dispute. This was war, and Karen had just kicked the wrong homeowner off his own land. By sunrise the next day, I was sitting at my dining table with a fresh pot of coffee, my laptop open, and a growing stack of documents that painted a clearer picture of Karen's scheme. I wasn't just fighting for my guest house anymore. I was preparing to dismantle the throne she'd built for herself at the top of the HOA food chain. Miguel, my lawyer, had worked late into the night drafting a formal cease and desist letter, which I printed out and slid into a large envelope labeled in red ink, hand delivery only. I didn't trust email with someone like Karen. She'd probably claim she never received it or call it spam. At 9:01 a.m. sharp, I marched back into the HOA office. Karen wasn't at her desk. Her office door was slightly ajar, and I could hear her talking to someone on speakerphone, laughing about tenants being so much easier to manage than homeowners. I knocked once, pushed the door open, and set the envelope right in front of her with a polite nod. She stared at it like I'd just dropped off a bag of snakes. When she picked it up and saw Miguel's letterhead, her smile faltered for the first time since this started. She tried to bluff her way through it, of course. "You know this is a complete overreaction," she said, standing up with her arms crossed. "Trevor is just saying temporarily. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You forged my signature, illegally entered my property, and leased it to your nephew under a fake policy. That's not a molehill, Karen. That's criminal trespass and document fraud." She rolled her eyes and tossed the envelope onto her desk. "If you want to play lawyer games, fine, but the board will back me. They always do." That was the moment I realized she wasn't worried about being caught. She was confident that no one would dare challenge her. That smug sense of invincibility wasn't just arrogance. It was habit. She'd likely been doing this for years, bending rules, issuing fines, manipulating bylaws, and scaring neighbors into silence. But this time she picked the wrong house to mess with. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the local zoning office. The second was to the county fire marshal. And the third, which gave me the most satisfaction, was to the Department of Health. I reported unauthorized occupancy, lack of permitting for a rental structure, and a possible fire code violation. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. 2 days later, the inspectors showed up unannounced. I made sure I was home, sitting on my porch with an iced tea as 3 official vehicles pulled up outside the guest house. Trevor was in the backyard again, this time tossing a football to himself while wearing my old college hoodie. When the zoning official approached him with a clipboard and asked for proof of occupancy, Trevor looked like someone had just stolen his Xbox. I could hear the conversation clearly. Trevor tried to insist he had a lease and that Karen from the HOA had handled everything. When they asked to see the lease, he brought out the same laminated copy I'd seen. The fire marshal frowned and asked why there was a gas grill so close to the wooden shed. The health department rep asked about water access and whether or not the structure had a separate septic system. The answers to all their questions were the same. No, no, and definitely not. Karen showed up 10 minutes later, hair perfectly curled, floral blouse crisp, face redder than a sunburned tomato. She tried to wave off the inspectors, calling it a misunderstanding, but the zoning officer handed her a citation. The fire marshal gave her a non-compliance notice, and the health department threatened to escalate if the unit wasn't vacated immediately. I don't think I've ever seen her lips that tight. Trevor, now pale and fuming, packed his things that evening and drove off in the same dented Honda he arrived in. He didn't even say goodbye. The next day, a large orange sign appeared on the guest house door, condemned until permitted inspection clears. Entry prohibited. I smiled every time I saw it, but the cherry on top came when the story made its way into the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had posted a photo of the inspectors in front of my guest house with the caption, "Looks like Karen's little family deal didn't pan out." The post exploded with comments. Turns out I wasn't the only one with a Karen horror story. One neighbor said Karen fined them for painting their door an unauthorized shade of blue. Another said she'd issued them a warning because their wind chimes were too musical. And one poor soul claimed Karen once called animal control on their 12-year-old golden retriever for barking in an aggressive tone. By the following day, a quiet but powerful shift began. I received a knock at my door from Ellie and David, a retired couple who lived 2 houses down. They said they'd been waiting for someone to finally stand up to Karen. We talked on my porch for over an hour, and by the end of it, we had the beginnings of a plan. An HOA board shakeup. Karen had ruled with fear and manipulation long enough. It was time to gather votes, file motions, and shine a light on everything she'd done in the shadows. Of course, Karen wasn't done yet. The next morning, I found a violation notice duct-taped to my front door. It cited excessive outdoor illumination from the string lights I had wrapped around a tree out back, the same ones that had been there for 3 years. I pulled the notice off, crumpled it, and tossed it in the trash. It was her way of reminding me she still had weapons, but what she didn't realize was that I had just started using mine. That evening, I checked the footage from the new security camera I had installed after Trevor's furniture stunt. Around 2:14 a.m., the figure crept across my yard, flashlight in hand. They tried to pry open my garage door, failed, then slashed the rear tires on my truck before vanishing. I paused the video and zoomed in. The hoodie was unmistakable, my college hoodie, the same one Trevor had been wearing when he got booted out. I called the police, filed a report, and handed them the footage. They said they'd look into it, but I already knew how that would go. No arrest, no real consequence. Still, I uploaded the video and saved it in 3 places. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about outsmarting someone who thought she was untouchable. That night, I stood in my backyard looking at the condemned sign on my guest house, feeling the first real sense of victory. But I also knew this was just round 1. Karen would regroup. She always did, but this time so would I, and I had the neighborhood behind me. Let her try to lock me out again. Next time, I'd bring the key to the whole HOA. By the time the weekend rolled around, the orange condemnation notice on the guest house had become the most talked about piece of decor in the entire neighborhood. People slowed down as they drove past, some snapping photos, others whispering behind their windows. I pretended not to notice the attention, but every sideways glance fueled me. I wasn't just fighting back for myself anymore. Karen had turned our community into a puppet show, and I was yanking the strings now. But the thing about poking a control freak like her, she doesn't sit quietly and lick her wounds. She reloads. Late Sunday night, an anonymous post popped up on the neighborhood forum. It claimed a certain troublemaker had made false reports to city officials, jeopardizing our HOA's reputation, and that those engaging in reckless retaliation against HOA leadership would be held legally responsible for damages. The post didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Half the comments were vague threats wrapped in HOA policy jargon, the other half outright insults pretending to be concern. The post was signed Concerned Resident, which was as subtle as Karen calling herself humble. It was her style through and through. I knew I had to get ahead of her next move. She'd already started planting seeds of doubt about my intentions, probably hoping to turn the board and neighbors against me before I gained too much support. But she was underestimating how fed up people had become. I knocked on doors that week. Some belonged to neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. I brought coffee to retirees, helped one lady fix her porch light, and talked to a couple who'd once received 5 separate fines from Karen in a single month. Each time, I asked the same question: has Karen ever stepped outside her bounds with you? The stories were as ridiculous as they were disturbing. She had fined a man for unapproved gutter colors. She had ordered someone to repaint their fence after claiming it was visually aggressive. She once threatened to revoke a family's pool key because their kid rode a scooter too close to her driveway. It was a pattern: petty, vindictive, and always masked as policy enforcement. And suddenly, it wasn't just me building a case anymore. It was an entire coalition. We met in Ellie and David's garage, 7 of us at first. By the end of the night, that number had doubled. We compared notices, dug through bylaws, even printed out screen grabs of emails and texts from Karen that contradicted each other. Someone managed to get their hands on an older version of the HOA guidelines and highlighted every amendment Karen had pushed through during her tenure. Half of them weren't even voted on properly. She just typed them up and enforced them like gospel. As momentum grew, Karen hit back harder. I received a letter accusing me of violating the neighborhood landscaping rules for having unauthorized plant groupings. Another neighbor was written up for using non-regulation patio furniture. It was like she was pulling violations out of a bingo hat. She was spiraling, but still dangerous. She knew how to twist rules just enough to make people question their own rights. That's what made her so effective for so long. She blurred the line between authority and abuse so well that most folks just gave up. Then came the emergency HOA board meeting. Karen announced it like it was a state event, printing glossy flyers and taping them to every mailbox. The topic: restoring community harmony. I knew what that meant. She was going to try and paint me as a problem, frame the inspections as an attack on the community, and rally her loyal board members to censor or expel me. It was classic Karen: smile while you stab. But this time, I came prepared. I had Miguel draft a brief statement detailing the forged document, the unauthorized rental, and the violations of both municipal and state law. Since I wasn't technically allowed to speak, I gave the statement to Ellie. She'd been on the receiving end of Karen's wrath, too, fined twice for a bird feeder and once for painting her garage door too cheerful. She was ready. The meeting was packed. The community center hadn't seen this much turnout since someone tried to ban Halloween decorations 3 years ago. Karen stood at the front in her signature pastel blazer, welcoming everyone with a calm smile that barely hid her tension. She opened with a speech about unity, about how recent events had created division, and how misinformation could poison an otherwise lovely neighborhood. Then she asked if anyone wanted to say a few words. Ellie stood, holding Miguel's printed statement, and read it with the kind of calm rage only a retired kindergarten teacher could pull off. She didn't embellish, didn't rant, just laid out the facts: the forged waiver, the unauthorized rental, the city violations, the retaliation notices. She ended by asking the board to investigate Karen formally and suspend her from duties until the matter was resolved. That got murmurs, real ones. Karen tried to regain control, but something had shifted. People weren't naughty anymore. They weren't intimidated. One man raised his hand and asked about a bogus fence violation he got last year. Another asked why meeting notes had been missing for 6 months. A woman stood up and said she had stopped coming to meetings because Karen mocked her accent behind her back. And now she had proof, thanks to a leaked voicemail. Karen's voice wobbled. "This is all hearsay," she said. A coordinated smear campaign by a disgruntled homeowner who doesn't appreciate the responsibilities of HOA leadership. That's when someone near the back shouted, "Check her emails." And the room erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Someone, probably one of our quiet allies, passed a USB stick to the board president. He plugged it into his laptop, and within minutes, everyone saw the subject lines: emails between Karen and her nephew joking about free housing, screwing with Alex, and how they'd just say he signed something. One message even offered a bottle of wine to a board member if he played dumb at the next meeting. Silence spread across the room like a fog. Karen looked around, face pale, hands shaking. "This is taken out of context," she said weakly. "That's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. The board president cleared his throat and said they would need to review the materials and reconvene. Until then, all enforcement actions by Karen were suspended. Her face crumbled in real time. She tried to speak again, but no one was listening. People were already getting up, heading for the doors, whispering with a new energy, the kind of energy that comes when fear loses its grip. That night, I walked home under the porch lights she once threatened to find me over, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I breathed easy. But I knew Karen wasn't finished. She'd crawl back, try to manipulate her way through the cracks. People like her didn't go down without clawing. Still, something had changed. The neighborhood was waking up, and I wasn't alone anymore. 3 days passed without a single HOA notice on anyone's door, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a place where people lived, not just where they got fined. The Halloween decorations returned. Dogs barked without fear of cetaceans. One neighbor even painted their mailbox flamingo pink just to see if anyone would say anything. Karen, once the queen of community tyranny, had gone radio silent, but I knew better than to assume she was gone for good. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Miguel called me on a Thursday morning, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and disbelief. Karen had filed a complaint against me in small claims court. According to the papers, I had deliberately sabotaged her nephew's housing arrangement, engaged in defamation, and emotionally distressed her to the point of medical symptoms. The number she was suing for, $2,000, for reputation damage and displacement costs. Miguel laughed so hard he had to put me on hold. I didn't. I knew what this was, a distraction, an attempt to flip the narrative and reestablish control, even if it was petty. She couldn't find me anymore, so now she was taking swings in court. But that wasn't the only surprise. That same afternoon, I found a folded letter taped to the condemned guest house. It was anonymous but clearly written by someone close to Karen. It warned me that if I continued pushing for removal, the HOA would retaliate through all lawful means available. I took a photo, bagged the letter, and handed it to Miguel the next day. He wasn't laughing anymore. Still, I didn't back down. The coalition was stronger than ever. We'd started a petition to formally remove Karen from the board, citing breach of duty, abuse of power, and community misconduct. Over 2/3 of the homeowners signed it within a week. People who hadn't shown up to meetings in 5 years were calling me to ask where they could vote. Even Karen's longtime allies began distancing themselves, claiming they'd had doubts for a while. Typical. Then came the special session. It was supposed to be a routine HOA finance meeting, but we'd added one extra agenda item, a motion to remove Karen permanently. Miguel attended with me this time, not as my lawyer, but as a concerned resident. He'd bought the unit next door as a rental property last year. Karen had fined him once for having unregistered tenant guests, which was ironic considering her stunt with Trevor. The meeting was packed again. Karen arrived late, wearing a bright yellow blazer like she was trying to distract people from her crumbling empire. She walked in with her head high, but her shoulders were stiff. She didn't greet anyone, no cheerful waves, no fake pleasantries, just the quiet, careful movements of someone trying to act unbothered. The finance review flew by. Everyone knew it was a formality. Then the board president announced the final item. Community motion, board leadership accountability review. That's when it happened. Karen snapped. She stood before anyone else could speak and launched into a monologue about dedication, sacrifice, and how the HOA had only functioned as well as it did because of her vigilance. She spun herself as a guardian of standards, a protector of order. She blamed social media mobs, fake emails, and manipulative men for the chaos. And just when everyone thought she might finish, she pointed directly at me. He is a menace, she said, voice shaking. He has poisoned this community against me, all because he didn't get special treatment. Well, I have news for you. Rules apply to everyone, even him. For a moment, the room was silent, and then someone from the back said loudly, "What rule lets you forge a signature and lease someone else's house to your nephew?" It was followed by laughter, then scattered applause. Karen's face twisted into something halfway between rage and disbelief. Miguel stood up and calmly handed the board president a printed packet, the same emails, photos, and notarized letters we presented earlier. But this time, we included a detailed timeline and testimony from 5 other neighbors who had experienced direct abuse. The president read through the summary, then looked out across the room. "We're voting tonight," he said simply. The vote wasn't close. 3 board members abstained. The rest voted in favor of Karen's removal. When the final count was announced, Karen didn't argue. She didn't speak. She grabbed her oversized tote bag, stood without a word, and walked straight out of the room. No eye contact. No parting shots. Just the sound of her shoes clicking against the tile and the slow exhale of an entire neighborhood watching their tormentor vanish into the night. But the story didn't end there. A few days later, I received a package in the mail. No return address. No note. Inside was my original guest house key, the one Karen had changed without permission. It was duct-taped to a card that read, in sharp block letters, "It's yours again for now." That was the moment I knew she wasn't done. She might have lost the title, but Karen didn't give up power. She just changed tactics. I had Miguel file a motion to dismiss her small claims case immediately. He included the forgery evidence, the city inspection failures, and a formal counterclaim for legal fees. Within a week, Karen withdrew the case entirely, citing health issues and personal distractions. I could only imagine what she told her friends. Probably that she was the victim of a witch hunt and that we'd all be begging for her leadership again soon. But no one missed her. The board filled her seat with a quiet, fair-minded woman named Natasha, who had once been fined for planting lavender without approval. The bylaws were reviewed, several were struck down. A new clause was added to ensure any major policy changes required a 2/3 vote from residents. Transparency returned, and so did trust. As for my guest house, it took 2 months of permits and inspections, but eventually the orange notice was removed. I opened the door for the first time since that morning. Trevor slammed it in my face. It smelled faintly like cheap cologne and burnt eggs. I repainted every wall, replaced the locks again, and installed a security camera above the door, just in case. One evening, while standing on the porch sipping coffee, I watched a couple walk past and waved. A few months ago, they probably would have hurried along, eyes down, afraid of catching the HOA's attention. Now they stopped to chat. They thanked me for what I'd done, said the neighborhood felt alive again. That small moment made it worth it. Karen had underestimated a lot of things. My patience, my persistence, my lawyer. But most of all, she had underestimated how tired people were of being pushed around. All it took was someone refusing to be quiet. And once one person stood up, the whole street followed. It had been nearly 3 months since Karen was removed from the HOA board, and though the echoes of her reign still lingered faintly in neighborhood conversations, the air around here had changed. The tension that once clung to every mailbox like cobwebs had lifted. The community, which used to feel like it was under surveillance, now felt like a neighborhood again. Kids laughed more freely. Gardeners didn't flinch when planting something new. People waved with both hands instead of just one eye over their shoulder. Still, there was always the subtle knowledge that someone like Karen didn't vanish without leaving behind one last trick. It came on a Tuesday. I was walking back from the mailbox with a small bundle of letters when I saw it lying face down near the guest house door. A postcard. The front was an obnoxious image of a Florida beach at sunset, the kind you'd buy at an airport gift shop when you ran out of real things to say. I flipped it over and instantly recognized the handwriting. It was sharp, stiff, and annoyingly proud of itself. "Hope you're enjoying your little leadership experiment," it read. Some communities actually appreciate structure. Best, key, no return address. Just the smugness of a woman who still thought she had the last word. I laughed, tossed the card into the trash without a second thought, and walked straight into my guest house to finish the last coat of paint on the window trim. The place had been fully renovated now. Fresh walls, new curtains, resealed flooring, even a few upgraded appliances. It wasn't just about making it livable again. It was about reclaiming it. Every time I turned a screw or smoothed out a corner, I felt like I was erasing her fingerprints from the place, one brush stroke at a time. The next weekend, I decided to host a garage sale. Not just any garage sale, a statement one. I dragged every HOA violation letter I'd saved, every ridiculous notice, and every forged document into one giant box labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. Right on top of it, I taped a sign that said free for educational purposes only. Beside it, I sold mismatched patio chairs, a cracked bird bath that had once caused a cetacean, and a broken wind chime set someone had donated as a joke. It was half fundraiser, half public therapy session. People came in droves, not even for the stuff, but to talk, to laugh, to tell stories about what they'd endured and how free they felt now. Someone brought cupcakes. Another neighbor handed me a printed T-shirt that read, "I survived Karen's HOA," and all I got was this overpriced fine. It was the first time I'd seen our neighborhood genuinely enjoy itself as a group. No one was worried about noise levels or unauthorized parking spots. It felt like healing. But just as things seemed to settle, one final twist arrived in the form of an official-looking envelope marked with the county seal. For a moment, my heart sank. I thought maybe Karen had filed something else, an appeal, a complaint, some ridiculous accusation she'd cooked up while sunning herself under a palm tree. But when I opened it, it was something I hadn't expected at all. It was a notice of a pending audit on the HOA's financials, triggered not by our actions but by a whistleblower. At first, I assumed it was one of our coalition members, but after asking around, no one claimed it. Then I received a short email from a private account I didn't recognize. It simply said, she wasn't just power hungry. Check the 2021 Community Beautification Fund. Attached was a spreadsheet showing expense reports and missing receipts from Karen's time managing the budget. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for, chalked up to things like community improvements and event planning that had never actually happened. The audit was now more than a formality. It was a full-blown investigation. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had once rolled their eyes at HOA politics were suddenly attending meetings, demanding transparency, and asking for monthly financial statements. The new board handled it well, calm, honest, patient. They didn't scapegoat Karen, but they didn't hide what she'd done either. A formal complaint was filed with the state's HOA Oversight Committee. If charges followed, they'd be civil, maybe even criminal, depending on how deep it went. I stayed out of the legal side of things from that point on. My role in the story was done. That spring, I turned the guest house into a small retreat rental. Just a few weekends a month. Nothing fancy, mostly visiting family members of neighbors or couples looking for a quiet staycation. But every guest who stayed got a short welcome note that began with, "This home was once stolen, but now it's a sanctuary." Some smiled when they read it. Some asked for the full story. A few had already heard parts of it online, where someone had posted a summarized version in a local community drama group titled, "When Karen Took the Guest House and Got Evicted from Her Own Throne." Life returned to its quiet rhythm, but this time it was a good kind of quiet, not the kind you fear because it means someone is scheming. It was the peaceful quiet of normalcy, of lawnmowers on Saturdays, wind chimes on porches, and neighbors waving across the street without suspicion in their eyes. There was something warm about watching the community rebuild itself without anyone barking orders from a fake pedestal. One evening, I walked past Karen's old house. It had been rented out now, her family having long since relocated. The new tenants were a young couple with a toddler and a giant golden retriever who barked happily every time someone walked by. No one had complained. No one had cited them for having unapproved holiday lights or leaving a stroller on the porch. I smiled, knowing exactly how far we'd come. That night, I stood outside my guest house with a cup of tea, listening to the gentle hum of sprinklers and distant laughter. It had taken months of frustration, thousands in legal fees, and more than a few gray hairs, but I'd won, not just the battle for my property, but the larger one, the one about standing up to bullies who hide behind rules they invent, about reminding a community that it belongs to its people, not the petty tyrants who try to rule it. Karen had left a scar ashore, but she also left behind something unexpected, unity. Her downfall became the rallying point that brought people together. And maybe, in some twisted way, That was the one good thing she ever did for this place. As I locked up for the night, I looked once more at the small wooden sign mounted near the guest house door. It read, "Private property. Owner occupied and no Karens allowed." A neighbor had made it for me as a joke, but I left it up. Not because I needed the reminder, but because it made me laugh. And after everything, that was the best victory of all.